sitting with a cold one and going through that and through fond memories. But let's get to business today. And if I remember how to do this, first item would be the director's comments. Our first item, I think, is you already called us.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. I think for purposes of our live streaming, I'm going to make my few remarks from the podium this morning. It is great to see a good crowd here in St. Louis, and we had a wonderful tour yesterday of the soon-to-be open shooting range, archery range, and so it was a great tour, and things are coming along nicely. Also wanted to give you, though I know we gave you an extensive presentation at the last commission meeting on our repairs related to the April flooding, but just a few short updates in that regard. You'll not be surprised to hear these numbers. Staff have worked nearly 12,000 hours in their response and recovery efforts. Staff have driven nearly 100,000 miles in the repairing of flood damage. A few updates just by region. In the Ozark region, areas that are still closed include Blair Bridge. Repair work will begin here Monday. In fact, we think the area will likely reopen the following week. Warren Bridge, staff are evaluating what repairs are feasible there, and reopening will partially depend upon coordination with the county. Cook Access, further evaluations will be made this next week. Myrtle Access, the area is now open. Jerome Access, as you know, I think you saw pictures the last time, there was significant damage there and rebuilding options are still being evaluated. In the southeast region, everything is open at this time. The central region, the only region in the Missouri River unit that has a closed area, pay-down access remains closed, and we're evaluating options for relocating the Privient on that particular area. In the southwest region, all areas are open, and the cleanup efforts are about 80% complete. And in the St. Louis region, only Prairie Slough access in Lincoln County is closed due to high water. All other areas are open to the public. So significant work has been done in this regard. At the August meeting, we'll have a complete update and a complete estimate for the commission at that time. Just a short update, we've been talking a lot about our strategic transformational efforts, and we are still on track for a very aggressive time frame and milestones. We've identified 18 outcome champions that have been assigned. They have gone on to assign teams, and the outcome champions and their teams will be accountable for outcome results by determining strategies, objectives, and activities that the department will then undertake through annual budgeting and work planning. As part of this effort, we did an all-staff survey and received over 800 responses from staff, over 400 pages of input from staff. And among the questions, what should we be doing more of? What should we be doing less of? So if the commission is interested in some very substantive reading, you're welcome to those results, but we got a lot of good nuggets in there as well. As you know, we introduced Todd Samsel the last time as our Assistant Director for Operational Excellence, and he has hit the ground running. A long list of suggestions from our division chiefs from the all-staff survey on areas where we can identify operational excellence. As you know, the top priority has been our capital improvements process, and so that one was slated first. That particular workshop has been set for the week of July 17th. It'll be a 4-day workshop hopefully with a new process in place after that particular workshop. So if the commission has any interest in popping in just to watch that process at work, that would be a good opportunity. Finally, just would recognize Pollinator Week. And Commissioner Murphy and I had the opportunity to be at a press conference a couple of days ago in which our own governor, we delivered his proclamation in support of monarchs and all pollinators, as we've also presented to the commission in the Midwestern region, which is such a significant part of the monarch flyaway. We have a responsibility for 1.6 billion stems of milkweed over the next 20 years. Missouri is really leading the way in our collaborative. Over 40 partners have joined the Missouri for Monarchs effort, many of them agriculture, but all sorts of partners, and so efforts are underway in that regard as well. Finally, it is Employee Appreciation Week, and you know very well what an amazing staff we have here at the Missouri Department of Conservation. We're so incredibly proud of them. We're working on some regional employee appreciation events over the coming weeks, and we'll certainly let the commission know about that if you'd like to attend any of those. But just our opportunity to say how incredibly proud we are of our staff and the meaningful work that they do every day.
And happy birthday to Jacob.
And a happy birthday to Jacob. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sarah. Next up is Deputy Draper, Rex Committee. Go ahead.
Well, Jim, good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Rhonda. Before I get on to my report, I want to say a couple things here. One is the director and I had an opportunity to spend some time on the Great Rivers Greenway by the hotel there. We went on a trek across country, and knowing Jim that he's been very instrumental and worked very hard on this Green Rivers Greenway. I mean, it was awesome. It was a great morning. So again, thanks for your commitment to that. So moving on here, the Regulations Committee met on May 24, 2017. While there are no action items for your consideration, I wanted to take this opportunity to provide an update on items of interest. On May 24th, the Regulations Committee heard from two individuals who expressed their desire to use unmanned aircraft systems, UAS, commonly referred to as drones, on department-owned and managed lands. I advise these individuals that the department looks for ways to accommodate citizens' requests whenever possible while balancing the desires of other area users and the needs and well-being of wildlife. I noted that the department assembled a working group led by GIS Supervisor Tony Specie to review and recommend changes to the current policy that prohibits the use of drones by citizens and department staff on conservation areas. Following these individuals' presentations, Mr. Specie provided a brief overview of the working group's discussions and noted that information provided by the two individuals will help inform the continuing dialogue that the agency will have on this important topic. Again, it's to balance the desires of the public, but we have a responsibility to protect the resources. There's some legal things, and our general counsel is actively engaged in analysis so we can figure out, can we use this tool, how do we use this tool on department land? So more to come on that, and as our deliberations continue, I will bring back other updates to the commission. Commissioners, as you know, the final step of the department's regulatory process is follow-up review of anticipated costs associated with the implementation of each and every rule change promulgated by the agency. To comply with state statute, I instruct divisions to assess each rule change 1 full fiscal year after implementation, and using the same criteria, determine the actual cost of all affected state agencies and political subdivisions. If the actual cost is over the original estimate by 10% or more and has exceeded $500, a statement of actual cost must be filed with the Secretary of State and published in the Missouri Register within 90 days after the close of the first full fiscal year. If we don't do this, the published regular rulemaking is voided. I'm going to cover a little bit about our chronic wasting disease sampling, our efforts there, and why we needed to make an adjustment. The actual cost of last year's mandatory CWD sampling efforts was $564,453, or 13% over the estimated cost of $494,137. However, a portion of the cost for CWD testing and salaries for hourly staff is federally reimbursable, which was not factored into the original cost estimate. Making the adjustments for federal aid, the actual cost for mandatory sampling in fiscal year 2017 was $291,746, or approximately $202,000 less than the original cost. Given that the estimated cost deviated from the actual cost sufficiently to warrant explanation for purpose of state statute, the department will file a statement of actual cost for 3 CSR 10-4.200 chronic wasting disease management zone on July 1, 2017. Essentially, we're checking the box, making sure that we follow state statute to account for what our actual costs were. So I wanted to bring to the commission's attention that we're making that adjustment to follow state statute. If there's no questions, I'm going to continue to move on with my report.
No question.
I have one, Tom. When you say it was $500,000, we had 900 volunteers, we had 900 people.
So we had 900 staff that they were on the clock working on this.
Correct.
Yes. I messed up things here, but that's why we got IT folks. As reported in past meetings, Governor Greitens signed an executive order in January that requires each state agency to conduct a full review of all regulations. Agencies are expected to actively engage the public to obtain their input during a 60-day comment period and host a minimum of 2 public meetings on the topic. This review is in addition to the statutory review required every 5 years, which you will recall we completed last year in 2016. The Department of Conservation will utilize our existing Regulations Committee structure to complete this review and has planned a robust public engagement effort centered around our regional 80th anniversary open houses scheduled this fall. And Aaron's going to talk more about that later today, so we'll share on that. By the end of calendar year 2017, the department will have reviewed all public comments received, and by direction of the executive order will complete a spreadsheet with recommendations to appeal, repeal, amend, or leave unchanged each rule in the Wildlife Code based on our analysis and public comments received. I might add that Todd Samsel is going to guide this effort through the Regulations Committee, working with Denise Bateman and others, and ensure that we have this report complete. Personally, I think we're well on our way to establishing this. Our public meetings that we've got scheduled is going to be a great venue to talk to citizens about their perceptions. So more to come on that, but the good news is that we're organized and moving forward with this effort. And again, Todd will help us get down the road. Commissioners, since my last Regulations Committee report, the citizens have provided input on regulations pertaining to hunting and fishing regulations, permits, and rules that govern activities allowed on public land. A summary of those comments are included in my formal report beginning on page 2. Upcoming meetings of the Regulations Committee are scheduled for July 27th, and that will be our mid-year code review, September 27th and November 16th. So again, no action items. Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, unless there's questions, this concludes my formal report.
Commissioner Bedell?
I have a question, Tom, about the letter that Brian wrote to Mr. Brown
Correct, okay.
concerning the use of jugs
Mhm.
and his wife.
Mhm.
Could we get some clarification on that exactly? Explain to us in layman terms. Maybe one of the enforcement people could, exactly what this means.
Larry, you want to come to the podium and explain how we do business there with jugs?
Yep. Bear with me while I find the regulation here. What's your specific question, Commissioner?
Well, I just want to understand it because, as I see it, we're talking about trot lines and jugs. I'm not sure I understood everything about this gentleman because of his handwritten note. Mr. Brown directed to us about his wife couldn't check the jugs or she couldn't take the fish off the jugs.
Yeah, there is a regulation. The purpose for the labeling of jugs and working with other people's fishing equipment is making sure the people that are doing it have an actual permit to do it. And they're not stealing somebody else's fish off a jug that doesn't have their name on it. So if you're attending those jugs, you need to have a permit, it needs to be your jug, or that person needs to be with you, I think. So, in trot lines, when you join two together, you know, the regulation requires that they have, they can join them together, but the whole idea there is to keep them from getting over the number of hooks that they can have in the water. So there's a whole lot of tentacles to this, but the bottom line is if you're gonna fish jugs, your name needs to be on the jugs, so we know that those are your jugs and you have a permit to fish with them.
Okay, I would recommend that we look into this and see if there's, because it says your spouse has the ability to check clients while in the same boat as long as she has a valid fishing permit. She may not collect a limit of fish for herself from the jug lines with your information on them. The joining together of fishing equipment only applies to trot lines. If you or your spouse both have jug lines and you both harvest limits, then it is your responsibility to keep your wildlife separate or distinctly identifiable. I guess what I'm thinking, Amanda's wife are out there and he has a license. What we're saying is, I can understand that you can only catch one limit of fish, right?
Correct.
But does this prohibit her from taking that fish off that jug?
If he's in the boat with her and she's got a permit, she can assist him. Anybody that's assisting with fishing has to have a permit. If she's got a permit and he's with her, yeah, they can work together in the same boat.
But she has to have a permit to check the jug.
To help him, yes. Permit requirements are there for anybody who's, every act of assistance as well as the taking, and that prevents people from, taking fish without a permit. That's the way the permits are, for example, gigging. If you're operating the motor, you have to have a permit because that person on the front couldn't gig if you weren't running the motor. So in every act of assistance, you have to have a permit. That's been our standing rule for at least the last 37 years that I've been around.
Did we give this gentleman a ticket?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank
Does that, did I clarify it or did?
you.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
but I still think that, you know, sometimes maybe we're in an overkill situation. I understand where you're trying to go, but I'm thinking of this man that's out there and he's got his wife wants to go with him. And she doesn't fish or anything, but she just happens to be in the boat. And if she's gonna look at a jug, then basically she's violating the law. I don't necessarily agree with that.
Well, if you put yourself in the agent's position, he watches somebody picking up a jug and taking a fish off of it, that person doesn't have a permit. So what would the agent's call be there? If her name's not on the jug and she doesn't have a permit, that's the situation, we have to put it in that context. So the simple, it's not really been an issue with a lot of folks. If you're, jug fishing, your name has to be on the jug, you have to have a permit to work the jugs.
Okay,
Well, I tend to agree with Commissioner Bedell. It's a tough job. You guys have to make a lot of judgment calls. And in many situations, you have to determine on the spot what's going on there. But if she's taking the fish off and there's only one limit of fish in the boat and it's on his permit, is it really a problem?
Well, what would be the difference from that and her having a pole and line and two poles and lines in the boat and she picks up the pole and line and takes the fish in?
That's a good point.
The whole idea on the permit requirement is to make sure that the people who are exercising the privilege of fishing have paid for the privilege to fish. That goes into our revenue stream to help pay for the programs to provide the fish that they're fishing for. It's not a technical thing to make tickets, it's a reassurance and assurance that people who are utilizing the resource, the privilege of utilizing the resource, are paying their way.
And Any other comments or questions, Commissioner Mercy? Commissioner Bradford?
I don't
Well, Larry, like I said, I think it's a tough situation for the agents to always have to make judgment calls, because it's always got some shade of gray in many of the situations you're in, and I think more often than not, our staff does a good job in that regard, and I'm sure it's something that you guys will continue to look at.
And agents are taught discretion, and they exercise the discretion to the best of their ability. We have a 95% plus conviction rate where you have very few complaints. Every now and then a question comes up. Sometimes we make the regulation more difficult than we need to, but again, agent comes up, somebody's pulling a jug out of the water, takes a fish off of it, that's all they've seen. They gotta make a call. And most of the time they make a good call. The question comes when trying to explain the regulation to folks when they don't really see the need for it because, well, I'm just helping. And if that's the direction that we need to go, then we can change the regulations to do that, to where not everybody has to have a permit to fish.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Not to belabor the point here, but recall that we, in regards to permitting, that if I am helping my grandson hunt turkeys, I'm required to have a permit. And so that, there's many tentacles, as Larry says, but I will pledge you as Regulations Committee Chair, we'll have a conversation about this and
Thank you.
go from that point.
You know, I think if going out, so I get the privilege of waxing philosophical here, so indulge me, but, you know, as I reflect on this conversation, we're not, you know, look, we support the enforcement people, and this is no way to, you know, criticize them or challenge them, it's just to make sure that we're treating our
Absolutely.
citizens
And it's not taken as criticism.
the right way. And I can't help but take a shot at, you know, when we deal with the deer breeders, for example, and the high fence industry, it seems like, you know, we're all hands off and God forbid we should enforce or be tough or, you know, have some strict lines. But when it comes to our citizens, you know, we're more willing to say, well, this is the rule. And I just take that shot on my way out. But, you know, I want to get that out there because they do more harm than, little old lady taking a limb of fish.
Understood. If there are no other questions, Commission, I'd like to introduce the next topic.
Before you introduce that topic, can we get a motion I skipped over
Okay.
for the consent agenda?
Motion to approve as offered.
Any discussion, or do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign carries, motion carries, consent agenda is approved. Sorry, Tom, go ahead with the
Yeah,
presentation.
no problem. At this point, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jeff Rigler. He's going to present a PowerPoint on turtle harvest, commercial turtle harvest, concerns about turtle populations. This is the first step in the process that the agency will take to explore this through the Regulations Committee rule promulgation process to begin to understand whether this agency should restrict the commercial harvest to 3 important turtle species. So with that, Jeff, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here. And by the way, this young man's a new dad, so.
2 weeks old.
Yeah. He's getting a lot of sleep, just ask him.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to allow me to provide an update on commercial turtle harvest. We've been working at this for several years now. So we'll start off first a little bit about the history of turtle trade. And in general, there's a lot of different types of uses of turtles. Human consumption is one of the primary goals, and that includes most of our larger turtles, the snapping turtles and soft-shell turtles. And how are they used? They can be used for local food sources here in Missouri. They're definitely used in national food sources like the Asian Southeast markets in the U.S. But most of the turtles in the U.S. are actually being shipped overseas into international trade. And this has been labeled as, in the literature, as the Asian turtle crisis. In Southeast Asia, most of the turtles have declined. Some of them are even extirpated due to habitat changes and overharvest. So now the U.S. is the larger, more turtles in the U.S. are being exported now because of this. In addition to consumption, there is a pet trade industry for turtles, internets, exotic pets, pet stores. You can buy turtles anywhere. And it doesn't matter what type of turtle, small turtles, large turtles, charismatic turtles, all of them have some type of market value. In addition to live turtles, parts of them are actually used a lot too in traditional Chinese medicines. The shells, the eggs are all ground up into some type of medicinal remedy. So the U.S. is supplying the food market for turtles now in Asia. The exports in the a 10-year period from 2002 to 2012 is greater than 126 million turtles exported. And a lot of turtles are now listed on the CITES list for tracking exports, and that's the international trade. And recently, in the last 2 years, snapping turtles and soft shells were added to that list to get a better handle on how many are being exported out of the U.S. So let's talk a little bit about the demographic characteristics of turtle populations. In general, they're long-lived. Most of them are over 30 years of age. They have delayed sexual maturity. Most species don't mature until they're at least 10 years of age. They do not produce very many eggs. In most species, it's less than 30. They have an extremely high nest predation rate, meaning very few of the eggs ever hatch. Most of that's due to high nest predation, like from raccoons. They have low hatchling survivorship. However, they have high annual survivorship of adults. Once a turtle becomes an adult and has this big protective shell, there are very few enemies for that turtle to kill it. They lack what's called a density-dependent reproductive capacity, meaning once a turtle is a certain size, they can only produce so many eggs that are inside that shell. So if they produce 20 eggs, they're going to always produce somewhere in that 20 range or less. So if you're removing turtles out of the population, that turtle cannot produce 20 eggs the next year due to available resources. So they don't have a means to compensate for harvest. And also, all the literature out there shows that adult turtles are basically the most important individuals for population stability. There's starting to be a growing amount of literature related to harvest. And is it sustainable? And most of the literature will state that these life history traits that I just discussed place biological constraints on harvest and turtle populations, and they cannot rebound quickly. It's very slow for recovery. And just a few examples in the literature, just on the first example there, removing 10% of the population based on this modeling resulted in a 50% reduction in adult common snapping turtles within 15 years. The next paper, a 7% removal. If you remove 7% of the population, you need to see a 234% increase in egg production by all females to maintain a stable population. And you're not going to see that increase. They don't have the capacity to double it. Even in this last paper, 4 to 5% of the females removed for painted turtles makes the population vulnerable to decline. So how does harvest of turtles compare to other big game species? So if we start off at the top, is time 0, where you have 1 turtle, 1 black bear, 1 moose, 1 white-tailed deer. And over a certain amount of time period, when the turtles become sexually mature, here down at the bottom circled in red, by this time period, a snapping turtle is just now laying their first egg clutch. And remember, it's a very low number of eggs, it's not very many. By that time period, a black bear has already produced 25 offspring, a moose 681, and a white-tailed deer has 912. So there's a slow reproductive rate and they're slow to recover. So how does Missouri compare to other states on commercial turtle regulations? And every state varies in a lot of their laws, and I try to condense this into different categories. So the blue color states allow no commercial turtle harvest at all. The yellow are considered more restrictive than Missouri, so they have more restrictive regulations related to it. The yellows with the slash mark are states that are phasing out commercial turtle harvest over time, And then the reds are what we would deem less restrictive from Missouri, like Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, and Georgia, that are more liberal in opening up regulations. So around the state of Missouri, our border states, Illinois, Kentucky, Nebraska, Kansas are closed. Tennessee only allows the harvest of common snapping turtles. Oklahoma, until recently now, they implemented a 6 daily limit. And Iowa just changed a few months ago from being open for 4 species to unlimited number to 6 per day with a possession limit of 30 only. In addition to this map, when I've given talks before, I went back in time, and since 2009, the last presentation, 6 more states have closed commercial harvest, and 6 more states have become more restrictive than Missouri. So there is a trend going in that direction. So what are the turtle regulations for Missouri? This is our current regulations. We allow 3 species are available for harvest by 2 different means. You can do it commercially or sports harvest. The 3 turtles are the common snapping turtle there on the bottom left, the smooth soft shell in the middle, and the spiny soft shell on the bottom right. The regulation for sports harvest is you have to have a fishing license. There's a daily limit of 5 common snapping turtles, 5 soft shells in total. There is no season for common snapping turtles. They're open year round, but soft shells are only open from July 1st through December 31st, and you can capture these by hand or line of some type. Commercial harvest, you have to possess a commercial fishing license, and we have annually about 235 individuals that purchase this. On turtles, there's no daily limit, no season. You can use traps and nets. We are restricted to certain bodies of water there on the map, the Missouri, the Mississippi River, and then the boundary waters of the St. Francis River with Arkansas is where we allow our commercial harvest. So our trends of harvest numbers and number of harvesters legally reporting turtles. First, I'll start with the bar graph in red. That's the number of turtles annually legally reported. So you can see in the early 90s, the numbers are fairly low. There's a significant increase occurring in the early 2000s. It peaked in 2007, a little over 2,100 turtles. And then it kind of dropped again, and it's maybe slightly increasing, but it's kind of an ebb and flow. In 2010 and 14, there were heavy flood years, so probably not a lot of individuals were trapping at that time because the rivers were flooded. Then the blue line represents the number of individuals that are actually reporting take of turtles. Now, 235 individuals annually could harvest turtles, but these are the ones that are reporting that harvest. So the trend line is decreasing. It's a high of about 16 individuals in 1993. In the last couple of years, it's down to 3 to 4 individuals reporting harvest. So what is the estimated value of our turtle harvest? The market does fluctuate like anything else. Our 2015 estimates for live weights for a snapping turtle is about 75 cents a pound, and for the soft shells about $1.50. So our estimated value of our 2015 harvest of 476 turtles were somewhere between $3,700 and $4,900. Now the market is dropping in some cases right now. What has happened over the years is U.S. turtle farms have been raising hundreds of thousands of little turtles like that photograph on the right and shipping those overseas, and the Chinese are raising them and breeding them themselves on turtle farms. So in the past, a turtle farm could get $8 for a little turtle. Now it's about 50 cents each, and most of the farms, especially in the South, they're just not making a profit by this. So because of the increase in snapping turtle breeding now, it is causing some of the market to drop out. However, wild-caught turtles are still seem to be sought after from a medicinal reason. With all the information we have now, back in 2009, the Regulation Committee requested that we try to gain more information related to turtle harvest in Missouri and our riverine systems. So we want to get a better handle on the effects of commercial harvest on our 3 harvested species. So we developed a graduate student project at the University of Missouri, and I'll briefly go through this project and some of the highlights. First, we started with a pilot study in 2010 to address uncertainties. I mean, there's not a lot of literature out there on turtle harvest, on turtles in riverine systems, so we wanted to address a lot of uncertainties like capture rates, the gear type, trapping intensities, duration. And based on all of that, give us better statistical inference to make good scientific conclusions on the data. So we wanted to improve our power analysis, detectability, precision analysis. So our two main objectives here is, one was to estimate the abundance of turtles and conduct a mock harvest of the 3 commercially harvested turtles in both the Missouri River and then unharvested populations in the Osage and Gasconade. And by mock harvest, that's where the graduate student pretended like they were the turtle harvester, and they went out and removed turtles themselves to see what percentage of turtles we are removing. Second, we wanted to develop models to look at the effects of harvesting these animals. So for the first objective, we selected sections on the Missouri and the lower Gasconade Rivers, 1 kilometer sections. Based on our pilot data and statistics, we needed to do intensive trapping for 8 trap nights to have good power analysis. Of course, every species we captured were identified, sex measured, and tagged. Then we conducted what was called the mock harvest, the estimated harvest proportions. So following within 6 days of the intensive trapping, we did 4 consecutive nights of trapping. We used the same trapping techniques as the harvesters, actually interviewed some of them to get techniques down. And then we would remove the turtles we captured, we would remove from the study as if they were being harvested. So what did we find on abundance estimates? For common snapping turtles, we found that they were significantly lower abundance in harvested versus unharvested sites. For smooth soft shells, the abundance estimates were greater on the Missouri River compared to unharvested sites, but we were unable to test significance between these 2 sites due to low sample size and recapture rates were very low. And spiny soft shells, there was no difference between harvest and unharvested sites, but again, this is due to low sample size and recapture rates. We just could not run stats on those numbers. So what was the results based on our mock harvest? First of all, in the literature, most published information suggests that acceptable annual harvest should be less than 7% to be sustainable. So based on what we learned in our study here in Missouri on the Missouri River is for common snapping turtles, we could remove 21% of the population within our sampling sites. For smooth soft shells, up to 16%. Spiny soft shells, almost 33%. So overall, we removed 23% of the population within those sampling sites for our mock harvest. And all of these rates are considerably greater than the sustainable rates reported in the literature. Second, we wanted to model the effects of commercial turtle harvest on these 3 species. So the data we collected in the first objective, using our mock harvest data abundance estimates, we wanted to evaluate mortality due to commercial fishing. We wanted to examine the demographic structures produced. And then we wanted to assess the level of harvest that would be necessary to maintain a stable population. In addition to, we pulled out as much information as we could from the literature. So for each of these, for these modelings, we would go through these demographic parameters on the side: nest survivor, hatching survival, juvenile, adult, clutch size, breeding frequency, number of clutches, duration, juvenile stage, abundance, and our harvest proportion. Within those, we did what we call minimum, average, and maximum value. So we ran models at the minimum reproductive rate. So what was the lowest number in those? So, and then we did the maximum. Let's say the turtles produce the highest number of eggs every year. 90% of the youngs hatched. That's the maximum reproductive rate for the population. And then we took an average, which is more characteristic of a population. So for common snapping turtles, our data shows for the minimum reproductive rate, the low end, our population growth, if that number is below 1, it's not going to grow, it's going to decline. So for minimum reproductive rate, we had no growth, it's not sustainable. For common snapping turtles, our average growth showed that about a 2.3% is sustainable. It's a very low percentage. Now, the maximum rate, it did jump up to about 18.6%. However, it is very unlikely for the maximum reproduction to occur. I mean, this is the best of the best. And also something to keep in mind, this has to be consistent from year to year. If we have major flood years, the turtles will not reproduce in the Missouri River floodplain because they have nowhere to lay their eggs. So what about soft shells? Both at the minimum and the mean, there is negative growth. The population will decline. And again, at maximum, if you have the best of the best, up to 16%. But again, this is very unlikely to occur. So in summary of the turtle project, there's life history traits that make turtles extremely vulnerable to overharvest, and they're very slow to recover. It will take decades. Our study contained much needed information on abundance and harvest rates that have never been published in the literature, actual harvest rates. We learned that common snapping turtles were significantly lower in harvested versus unharvested, and soft shells were inconclusive. The majority of the harvest proportions estimates exceeded 7% with an average of 23%. And just to show you a little bit about the range, we had a few in the 6% range, but we actually had some harvests where we removed almost 80% of the turtles in that one section of river. Our models indicate these populations are largely unable to sustain any level of commercial harvest except when demographic rates are maximized and that the adults are the most important segment of the population. And then also, even with the maximum conditions, the level of harvest, the average of 23% in this study is unsustainable. No matter what is reported in the literature, that is a very large number. In addition to this study, there has been a concerted effort to get stakeholder input in our state and other actions that have occurred. In the last few slides, I want to focus on that. Most of you are aware that we were petitioned by the Center for Biological Diversity and the Great River Law Center in August of 2016 to end unlimited commercial harvest. And we're not the only state that's being petitioned. There's 4 more petitions since this one with us, other than the southern part of the state. With that petition, the scientific community, mainly turtle biologists, and it's 115 individuals, wrote into the department supporting the ban on the for-profit harvest of turtles in Missouri in November. And then also since that time, we've received from citizens around the world 2 additional initiatives asking for a ban of commercial turtle harvest. And one was in March. It had 2,228 individuals and addresses. And then another one recently here in May with over 3,000 individuals seeking a ban. In addition to stakeholders sending in information to the department, we conducted our own survey, and we mailed surveys to 306 Missouri stakeholders, 281 were commercial fish permit holders, and 25 were conservation groups back in March. And these are the questions we asked them. Do you support closure, modification, like a season or a bag limit, or no change to existing commercial turtle harvest regulations, and why? Do you commercially harvest turtles, yes or no? Will changes result in a significant financial loss, yes or no? And if yes, what level of loss would occur? So here's some of our responses and the grouping. So first I'll talk about, there's 2 major groups, the permit holder group and the conservation group. So for the permit holder group, we have 2 types, the commercial fishing permit holders. So we sent out letters to all current holders in the last couple of fiscal years, wound up being 270 individuals. And then the commercial fishing permit holders reporting turtles. Make sure we sent out letters for input for anybody reporting turtles in the last 5 years, which wound up being 11 individuals. So the response rate for commercial fishing permit holders not reporting turtles was about 32%. For the 11 individuals that have harvested turtles, slightly less than 50% responded, and which led us to an overall group of permit holders of about a 32% response rate. Conservation groups varied a little bit. We sent 9 letters to turtle biologists in the state and a few outside the state that actually work on turtles in our state for their opinion. We had about a 78% response from them. 3 major zoos, 2/3 of those commented. 12 conservation organizations got the letter, so it's to be a federal agency, the Wildlife Society, American Fisheries Society, some of the herb societies, the petitioner, and others is listed. We received 3 letters based on the Wildlife Society and other individuals. Some of their members replied in their place. But, so overall, for the conservation group, we had about 68% response rate, and overall total is 35% response rate for this survey. So a quick summary of what we've learned from this survey. Commercial fish permit holders vary a lot in their responses. 42% had no opinion. And no opinion was either they wrote no opinion, they left it blank, and a few people even wrote, the department will do the right thing one way or the other. So they went in no opinion. 29% did not want regulation changes. An additional 21% thought more restrictive regulations were likely warranted. The conservation groups overwhelmingly supported closure. Most of them wrote letters stating why they support closure. An overwhelming majority of commercial fish permit holders do not harvest turtles, which based on our information, we're not getting reports from most of them, nor would they incur a financial loss. 4 individuals out of 91 respondents stated a financial loss would occur. And then all responses, 100% from the conservation groups, do not harvest turtles and would not incur a financial loss. So our next step is, basically we're gonna follow the regulatory process for mid-year review. We're working on drafting proposals on recommended actions. In July of 27th, there will be a presentation of the proposal to the Regulation Committee on the recommended actions. Then those recommendations will come back to you for your considerations. After that point, in October the 2nd, this will be published on the Missouri Register, which will initiate a 30-day public comment period. Then by December 15th, I will have compiled those public inputs and provide back to you for consideration. And depending on the outcomes, if things move forward, the code would be effective on February of 28th. So with that, I'd be happy to try to address any questions, and thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to update you on commercial turtle harvest.
Thank you for that presentation, Commissioner Bradford. Any questions or comments?
Just a comment, just phenomenal information that made me start thinking about some other industries as well, that made me think about some other questions. But I do appreciate what you've done because clearly you've researched this thoroughly.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Commissioner Murphy? I'm curious about the estimated impacts of sport fishery for turtles.
Well, that's something, we don't have a good handle on that because anybody possessing a fishing license, it is something we're looking at a way down the line to ask for numbers from people in a future survey. And so we're trying to look for opportunities to find out about information there.
Great work, Chad.
Commissioner Bedell?
First, I'd like to say congratulations on the new baby.
Definitely keeping me up at night, so.
And I guess maybe I missed it because I was kind of caught up with some things there. How long did the study go on with the university?
It was a 2-year study on the Missouri River, yes.
And you feel like you gathered enough information during that period of time to make recommendations
Yes,
on regs?
I feel like we have done enough, and plus that time, there's been additional stuff in the published literature that further supports actions.
What are you going to recommend? Would you share that with the commission? At this
Well,
point in
would you
time,
like to address that?
Well,
Or is that premature?
Yeah, Commissioner Bedell, I think at this point, we want to go through the process, regulatory
Okay.
process, have a detailed conversation in the Regulations Committee. We expect that we might have some of our stakeholders that would show up and provide additional input. And so at this point in time, it's really premature speculate on what we might provide. We'll go through the process and move from that point.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jeff, thank you for that presentation. I have one question and one comment. The question is, in regard to the pricing, you went through those slides and you gave me so much information, I can't remember it. But did you talk about the price internationally or in Asia, or did you talk about the price
The
domestically?
price to selling to dealers around the US.
So
Now,
what are they
the price,
getting?
it's probably double that, I would guess, on when they're shipping them overseas. So most of the harvesters will sell to some individual or dealer somewhere, and then they export those out.
And then I guess my comment is to Tom, we go to great lengths to follow the regulatory process and seek that input. And I think that's the hallmark of this agency, and we've always tried to bring science into the decision making. But when I think about chronic wasting disease and trying to run like heck to stay ahead of that, and could we have been more aggressive? And when I look at the blue states that you showed on the map that have already closed, are we leading or following? And I want to push you guys to make sure that we're not being too cautious in advancing regs. We have to be bold in advancing regs that we know to be accurate and the right thing to do. So let's don't be afraid to protect the resource.
Point well taken.
Thank you. Next up.
Yep, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
At this point, I'd like to introduce the next topic. Dr. Jason Isabel will give a presentation on ruffed grouse. But Commission, before I do that, we have some individuals in this room that I'd like to recognize that have been instrumental in this whole process, dedicated to an effort that started well before I became a regulations committee chair. And as I call your name, I'd like those folks to stand up. Nick Prow with Quail and Upland Wildlife Federation, and some of his members that have really, they've worked very hard at this. Tom Westoff, John Heckman, I believe Ted Cooper's in the room, and Bill Haig. Welcome, Bill. These individuals here they're focused. Believe me, they're focused, and I appreciate that focus. So these folks here, in a landscape that we might have an opportunity to restore ruffed grouse, to take it upon themselves and their organization to work very intensively with private landowners and us to try to move this forward. So thanks, gentlemen, for being here, and Jason will describe our next steps as we move forward with the concept of restoring ruffed grouse in a landscape in Missouri. And with that, welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Tom. Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Director Polly, Rhonda, and deputies. As Tom said this morning, I'm going to be providing an update on our plans to recover ruffed grouse populations in the River Hills region. So a brief outline, I'm going to start out with covering some basic grouse ecology and also the histories of this native bird in the state. Talk about some of the research that we've done in the River Hills that's informed where we're headed. Also about some habitat management efforts that have been really critical to the direction that we're heading in and what our plans entail. I'll get into the recovery plan, the specifics of the reintroduction, how we plan to monitor those birds, and also how we plan to sustain habitats, not only in our areas, but on private lands as well. And then the important outreach and education component that go along with the effort. So you see a range map for ruffed grouse, primarily northern species throughout the Canadian provinces up in Alaska, all the way down through the Rocky Mountains to Utah, to the Appalachian Mountains to the northern portions of Georgia. Missouri, we're at the southwestern extreme of the southern end of the range of the species. Historically, grouse existed throughout the forested portions of the state, probably at a little bit lower densities and further north and further east where the forests are a little bit more productive. The species we would call a classic young forest habitat specialist, and that simply means that it needs fairly extensive areas of young forests in order to be able to persist. And so an ideal habitat for this bird is an area that you see here in these two pictures. On the bottom, we see a male grouse on his drumming log trying to attract a hen. These areas have a significant proportion or even all of the canopy removed, allowing sunlight to hit the forest floor, allowing succession to take place. And as you can see from the pictures, there's a lot of woody stems. Those areas are very dense, and it provides protection from grouse from predators, and that's what they need in order to persist. Grouse were locally common following European settlement, but as we get into the late 1800s, their numbers plummeted pretty dramatically as a result of habitat loss and overharvest. First efforts to restore the species using wild trap birds that were brought in from Indiana and Ohio occurred in the late 50s and early 1960s. Those birds were released on the Daniel Boone Conservation Area and also on the Thomas Basket Wildlife Area in what we call the River Hills region, which roughly extends from about Columbia to St. Louis. Those reintroductions were classified as successful due to monitoring efforts after the birds were released. Next couple decades, there was a few hundred grouse released in Missouri, and based on population monitoring, there were increasing populations on the Daniel Boone site and also on the Anderson Conservation Area in northeastern Missouri. As we got into the late 1970s, restoration for the species accelerated greatly. It was an extensive restoration effort. We see the dots on the map being release locations. Most of the indications were that these were successful. Started a limited hunting season in the crosshatch area that you see there in the 80s. Was met with relatively little participation given the low densities of the bird and the challenges of the hunt. As we fast forward a little bit to about the mid-1980s, we started to see the population peak in the areas where there was intensive monitoring. As we got into the late 1990s, the population started to decline pretty precipitously. And one thing that we would note too is if we look outside our borders, throughout the southern range of the species, a lot of other states were seeing similar trends to what we were seeing in our bird numbers here in Missouri. So the cause for those declines is just simply forest maturation. Our forests are getting older. We're simply not replacing them. In general, are not doing as much even age forest management, clear cutting, shelterwood harvesting are not used as much as they once were. And as a result of that, habitat for the bird is just generally more limited. So generally the decline of grouse parallels the decline of young forest habitat availability. And it's not just grouse. Whether we look at whippoorwills, woodcock, a variety of young forest songbirds, a lot of these species are in long-term decline as a result of our forests getting older. So they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and so to put it very, very simply, we simply have too much of our landscape that looks like the picture on the left with a wide open understory, and just too few acres, and generally speaking, that look like the picture on the right with those high woody stem densities that these species need to persist. And so in response to declining grouse numbers in the early 2000s, we formed a partnership called the River Hills Forest Habitat Partnership. Audubon Society in Missouri was involved, the grouse chapter of the Rough Grouse Society, which is now the grouse chapter of the Quail and Upland Wildlife Federation, eventually expanded to include some federal partners, other NGOs, private citizens, and corporate sponsors to try to create habitat within that River Hills region, which is really the stronghold of the species, to try to curb the decline. Unfortunately, we've seen grouse numbers continue to decline. Populations are currently low, vulnerable to extirpation. And so some questions pop to the forefront. And one of those would we benefit from translocating grouse to take advantage of some of the habitat work that's been done in the River Hills region? Before we wanted to potentially embark on that sort of effort, we wanted to do a research project to figure out a couple basic objectives that would help with that decision. So we partnered with the Forest Service, and we looked at a portion of the River Hills region that you see in green, Boone County all the way to the eastern boundary of Warren County. We wanted to figure out how much grouse habitat do we have out there, and through some population modeling, we could figure out what chances we would be successful at restoring the bird given the habitat that we have out there right now. But we could also simulate some increases in habitat and see how that restored population would respond. So some take-homes from that project were, at that time, habitat for the bird was relatively limited on the landscape. Probably weren't going to be successful at restoring birds at that time period. And that started in 2011, ended 4 years ago. But one other thing that the research project told us is that if we could increase the amount of early successional habitat, get somewhere between 20 and 25% of the landscape in forests less than 25 years old, we have a reasonable chance of success at restoring this species. And so it provided us with an assessment of where we were at the time, but also where we needed to go to be successful. So as a result of that research project, our forestry division that manages Little Lost Creek Conservation Area and Daniel Boone, which are in Warren County, in the heart of the River Hills, essentially revised their management plan for those two conservation areas to maximize the amount of early successional forest habitat to benefit not only grouse, but the suite of wildlife species that depend on these habitats. And so there was some very aggressive habitat management that started during the winter of 2014 and 15. A lot of acres were treated in a relatively short amount of time. And so we believe those areas in just a couple short years will be suitable for grouse and to foster a successful restoration effort. It's also important to notice the work that's been done on private lands, our forestry folks, private lands folks working with private citizens like the folks that Deputy Director Draper recognized before I get up here. Been a tremendous amount of work on private lands. We've got a lot of dedicated folks, and we figure between the state and federal cost share and partner dollars, probably over $1 million of habitat work has been put in the River Hills since the early 2000s, and well over 10,000 acres impacted. So certainly been a concerted effort both on our areas and on private lands. So our plans would be to translocate 120 grouse from donor states to the River Hills region during the fall of 2019 and 2020. And that would involve releasing 60 grouse on Little Lost Creek Conservation Area in 2019 and 60 grouse on Daniel Boone Conservation Area in 2020. We've also included an additional year of translocations if we're not able to meet those goals of 60 during either of the first 2 years. So our public areas, Little Lost Creek, Daniel Boone would serve as core areas of habitat with long-term management plans in place, also recognizing that the importance of that private land component around those areas is going to be really critical to the success of the effort. An important part of this, of course, would be monitoring the success of the effort, and that would be done using complete area counts on the two conservation areas, essentially going out and spraying along transects, listening for drumming male grouse to get a sense of the population trajectory. Also establishing some roadside drumming surveys in and around the conservation areas to monitor the expansion of the population. And next year we would also submit a proposal to radio tag these birds and figure out survival rates, reproductive ecology, habitats that they use, movement and expansion, provide some insight into the causative factors of the recovery effort success. We also plan to monitor the suite of species that also depend on these young forest habitats, and so our wildlife division staff have been doing some of this work already in the region. So we would work with them to develop a protocol in order to be able to determine the impact of the habitat work on, as I mentioned, a range of species that desperately need this habitat. Management plans are already in place on the two conservation areas. As I mentioned, aggressive work began winter 2014-2015 on those two conservation areas using a wide variety of forest management practices. And so we anticipate by fiscal year 2020 having 23% of those areas in high quality habitat. And when each compartment and stand becomes fully enveloped in that management plan by fiscal year 2026, that would be 27% of those areas, which based on the research project indicates that we could be successful at restoring this species. Management on private lands is going to be very important as well. We've developed what we call a grouse focus area, essentially a 10,000 acre buffer around each of these conservation areas where we would intensively focus on habitat management, and then a larger 60,000 acre emphasis area to also focus our efforts. Our goals within that smaller geography would be to try to impact about 780 acres, which would be about 5% of the forested acres in that particular geography. Also, of course, work throughout the emphasis area, but also continue to do the habitat work that we've been doing outside of those areas throughout the River Hill region. Recognizing that these birds, when they disperse, will go anywhere from 1 to 3 to 4 miles. And so working in that focus area, the emphasis area will be important, but also continuing to do work in a bigger geography will be really important. Also exploring some cost share incentives to try to make it more attractive for more landowners to get involved and do the type of work that benefit the species. And also if strategically located private lands become available, consider purchasing those as long as it was in line with our acquisition strategy. Stakeholder and outreach would be really, really important. This is a sustained effort. I mentioned when you harvest timber in an area, it's only really suitable from about year 5 to 25 for grouse. So it's simply not the type of endeavor where you treat an area once and walk away. It requires consistent management. One of the big hurdles is, as I mentioned, even age management or a very heavy timber harvest is, there's some challenges with that educationally as far as letting our public know the importance of those areas and highlighting the importance of those areas to grouse and these other species as well. And so we plan to do a very concerted effort on that front, not only in the River Hills, but also at a statewide scale. Continue to support landowner workshops. Bill Hague has been gracious enough for many years now to hold a landowner workshop on his farm in Callaway County. And so we continue to support that effort, try to get more and more folks engaged in that. Promote the effort wherever we can, continue to support landowner cooperatives, which were spearheaded by the Quail and Upland Wildlife Federation, 2 large cooperatives in the River Hills. We've had several meetings so far in the last couple of years. We're off to a good start and we'll keep running with that as well. Keep folks updated annually on the progress of this effort, and also use our website, social media outlets as well to get the information out there, and we would rely heavily on our O&E folks to tell us the best way to do that. So to summarize, we have a native bird species here that's in decline, with loss of habitat, forced maturation being the primary cause. And so research indicates that we can sustain a population in the River Hills, and so we plan to translocate grouse in 2019 and 2020 to this region and monitor the success of the effort as well as other species impacts as well. Continue to manage habitat on our public lands and private lands, and continue to try to engage and educate our citizens of the importance of these habitats. That concludes the presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any.
Jason, thank you. Commissioner Fidel?
Yeah, I have several questions. Thank you for the information. Where will we buy these grouse?
So at this point, it's uncertain. We've previously reached out to the folks in Pennsylvania and had some preliminary discussions in the last couple of years, but a lot of that legwork would have to be done moving forward. And the level of compensation that states would want would have to be something that we would discuss with them as well.
And then, what do you think when you transplant these birds is the livability rate, if you will?
So survival of these birds is, as you probably guess based on their size, is relatively low. You're looking at annual survival rates of tend to be about 50% or so. But they have a fairly high reproductive output. They'll lay about 10 eggs, and their nest success is usually often in the ballpark about 60%. So they're not an incredibly long-lived bird, but they in between their clutch sizes and their nest success rates could expand pretty rapidly if the habitat is in place, which we believe it is.
Yeah, that was one of the questions, thank you for answering that I had was how many eggs will they lay in the clutch, and then what the hatchability rate is.
Yeah, they have a pretty high success rate. They're, as you saw from the pictures, they're small, pretty well camouflaged birds, and so they nest right on the forest floor, blend in with the leaf litter very well, and so it's tough for nest predators to spot, and so usually their nest success rate is very high.
It seems like, if I might, Mr. Chair, it seems like that there's some land down at the back that would lend itself to some of this.
Yeah, I think at this point, we've got things in motion here in the River Hills, and I think depending on the success of this effort, that could certainly be an option, and possibly expanding this to other areas that have the potential to be successful. I think one of the key things about this particular region is we've got the core of public land, but we also have that matrix of private land work that's been going on for 15 plus years at this point. So there's been a lot of legwork to get us where we are today, and that's really important, kind of a focal area of approach.
Well, I compliment the stakeholders that Tom introduced and appreciate what they're doing, and I hope that they certainly appreciate what we're trying to do. You know, my theory is, and in business, I kind of have a saying is TNT, today, not tomorrow. And it's hard for me to accept the fact that we have to wait till 2019 to do something. At my age, I like to get it done today. Waiting until tomorrow sometimes is beyond question. But this is great, and I think it's a great project for us, and it shows what we can do with participation from the public, private landowners, and working together on this. I just was curious as to what the reproduction rate would be. Do they lay lay one time a year? Do they hatch out twice?
They've got the potential to re-nest, but generally initial nest success is high enough that you don't see as much re-nesting as you do, you know, with a species like a turkey that's got a much lower initial nest success rate.
And the last question would be, how many acres in the two conservation areas, how many acres are you trying to work with? I know you had the line around and you're trying to get all that into focus area, but you talked about releasing 60 birds here or 60 there. And how many acres are you releasing those 60 in?
So those would be, on each area, 3 releases of 20 birds in 3 different areas on the conservation area that had really the best habitat that was available. You know, through the forest management plan on those 2 areas, they're really, I mean, those are pretty comprehensive plans. There's a lot of acres on there where we can get in there and do the types of harvest, like shelterwood harvest, real aggressive harvest to create those high stem density areas. They're also pretty steep in areas, and so our forestry folks did a really great job of figuring out on those areas that we maybe can't do a commercial harvest, how we can still treat those areas to benefit grouse. One thing I wanted to touch on to address one of your comments about trying to get started earlier, and I certainly can appreciate the sense of urgency. Perhaps I glossed over it too quickly in my presentation, but the reason that we had set it as 2019 is it takes about 5 years after you treat a stand in order for those woody stems to get to a height and density where they're suitable. And so a lot of those areas were treated winter 2014 and 15, so it won't be until about 2019, after 5 growing seasons, that those stands will have regenerated to be suitable. And we're just afraid that if we went in a little bit too early, that the habitat wouldn't be there as much as it would be if we just delayed it for a couple of years.
And I guess the last question, and I appreciate you indulging me. The last question would be, what kind of ratio will you release of male to female?
So our sex ratio, we want to get as close to 50-50 as we can.
Yeah.
And we want to get a pretty good mix of juveniles and adults as well, but probably at least 40% or more would want to be adults.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director Murphy?
Commissioner Murphy?
I'm thrilled at the deliberate plan. I'm not as old as he is, so I don't have the same sense of urgency. But I know that you're basing a lot of this on mistakes that were made in the past with releases in areas where the habitat wasn't there and the population couldn't persist. I think this is a commendable approach and one that can be successful. I'm thrilled that our supporters and friends and wonderful people in the River Hills, they've kept us alive. I had the opportunity back in the 1970s to be out on Daniel Boone with what we called a Polish chainsaw, which was just a piece of chainsaw chain with a couple of handles on it for Bill and Gowdy and I girdling some trees out there to try and make this work. And it wasn't possible to do it on the landscape. This commitment, this incredible commitment these people have made to make this happen. And being here today is one expression of that. I wish you the best. I'm really excited about it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bradford?
Well, I would commend the folks that have been working on this for 15 years. It does take the private sector working along with us to accomplish these things and then to be patient for that many years. I would ask you, Jason, this type of management, and maybe you've said it and I missed it, but what other species also benefit from this type of management?
There's some species like American woodcock, whippoorwills, and then a number of young forest songbirds, prairie warblers, yellowbreasts, and chats. A lot of those species just depend on the same. So grouse could be considered in a way an umbrella species, just representing that suite of species that needs that young forest habitat that we always had historically, but a lot of the drivers, historical drivers, large wildfires that essentially we're trying to mimic now with our chainsaws are obviously no longer operating at that scale, and so we're having to go out and actively get that habitat on the ground in order for them to be able to persist.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got another question, and that is, how do we propel this into the larger landscape? Is there any prospects of a forestry practice that can either create a market for smaller diameter product or cellulosic ethanol potential or anything like this out on the horizon that we can use to help us expand this so that the landscape can become suitable across the whole range.
That's something that I think we definitely need to pursue, and that's one of the big challenges too, is even if the mindset's there to create that type of habitat, if there's not a market for the smaller diameter timber, it makes it really difficult. So I think it's something that we definitely need to pursue and engage folks in doing so. You know, Kentucky's kind of embarking on a similar endeavor, kind of reinvigorating their management plan for grouse, and that's one of the things that they're looking at as well, trying to find that niche so that we can get those trees out of there and create the habitat.
Great work.
Jason, thank you. I have one quick question. That is, for a lot of people that aren't as engaged in the research as you are, and they're just hunters or novice sportsmen, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that question, you know, well, the habitat, there's plenty of habitat, but it's about predation or it's about other factors. Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, I think
I think
that,
that perception applies to not just grouse, but the
Sure.
turkeys and the quail and other things.
Sure. Yeah, and I hear that a fair amount too, and I would just say if you look at, you know, and talking to some of the folks that have been studying grouse for their whole careers, you see the correlations. Obviously, you know, you gotta be careful with correlation and cause and effect, but in this case, it's very compelling. That when you see the significant declines in the percentage of small diameter timber, boy, it's a smoking gun to me. And I think that the tricky part is our forests, you know, age so slowly and change so slowly, and you look at them every day and you just don't notice it until you look at the stats on a large scale and you realize, you know, in some cases over half of our small diameter forest is now larger diameter. Just looking at the landscape day to day, you wouldn't notice it. So I would say that the evidence is very compelling. You know, predation is a part of the dynamics of, you know, all sorts of wildlife species, but in this case, I think we can say with some very good certainty that it's habitat related.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
And we're gonna take a quick 10-minute break here.
On that, excellent.
right, is everybody ready to get back to work? Next up, we have Lisa Allen from Forestry. You got some timber you'd like to sell?
Yes. Good morning, Commissioners. Molly, Ms. Maples. I do have the next two items on the agenda, and they are action items, actions 6 and 7. And both as referred to our timber sale request for timber sales. I want to, before I get into the details of those timber sales, just give you a little bit of background. A lot of times I give you a little background on the resource management work we're trying to accomplish, and that probably sounds a little bit the same, but I can touch on that too. But I wanted to share a little bit of information about timing of timber sales and our sort of the logic that goes behind timber sales and when they're rolled out and when we implement them. Really 4 factors sort of determine that. Obviously staff workload, because managing timber sales on public lands, on conservation areas, is labor intensive, and our staff also work with private landowners and do community forestry and fire suppression, a host of other things. So we try to find those times of the year when we feel like that best fits into their work plan and what they hope to accomplish that year. So that's one of the determining factors. Another thing is the resource protection, because as you know, we have best management practices to protect soil and water. We have a manual that describes that for our staff, what that looks like. And there are certain times of the year when the soil's not in a condition that it's best to move forward with timber sales. So that's dictates the movement of a lot of our timber sales. Usually summer months, fall, that sort of thing, even in the winter when the ground's frozen, are good times to harvest. Maybe not in spring when things are wet and soggy. So, you know, protecting the resource, but not just the soil and water. We also have certain guidelines and requirements that we have to follow associated with species of conservation concern. As you know, we have bat management guidelines that impact our timing of our timber sales also to make sure that those endangered species are protected. So considering that, one of the things I've worked a lot with the forest products industry on too is we try to work towards a sustained flow of forest products. Because one of the things industry's told me loud and clear is that they like to know what's coming. They like to have a sense, because obviously they work on a lot of private land, other U.S. Forest Service land and so forth. And they really appreciate it when we don't throw everything on the market at once. We like to call it meter it out. So they know that a couple more big timber sales are coming next month, know what to expect, so they can work with their crews and other opportunities they have for their operation to be able to consider ourselves for the future. And then I guess the last thing and the fourth thing I'll mention that we try to monitor, while our objectives on timber sales are focused on improving forest health and focused on creating diverse wildlife habitat, we do want to be responsible with the state's resources. So monitoring markets and is something we also pay attention to. We do, and you may be familiar with this, we do provide information not only internally but to our partners and the landowners and others on that we call Timber Price Trends Report. So quarterly, we provide a report that's available to the public, we use it ourselves, that monitors price trends so we know how the markets are doing. We do that by asking not only our own staff as they administer timber sales to report to us on what the value of the timber is that they're selling, but also we ask all the consultant foresters in the state and also private landowners to report those figures to us too. So we feel like that's a pretty good monitor. You know, the main thing is getting people to provide the reports that are outside, not our people, but private individuals. So those 4 things combined is what we use as our formula or our logic to determine timing on timber sales. Just a little background.
Thank
Any questions on that?
I have a couple if I might, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
And,
sir.
and thank you for that, Lisa, because as we know, and I guess maybe I look at it a little bit different, but lumber is just a commodity, if you will, supply and demand, dictating a lot to do with the price. We obviously know that there's a difference in the market of a oak versus pine. There was a wonderful article in the Current Local, which is a Van Buren paper, that was just written by former director Presley you see that by
Yes,
chance?
I did.
I thought that was a wonderful article having to do with timber cut on Forest Service land, cutting pine. Do you ever look at saying, well, we could skip this and cut this later because of escalating prices? Or do we just say, it's time, and I realize that I've talked to my brother about this, as you know, he made his living doing this. And he says, well, you get caught up in pricing versus when you really need to harvest. And there's a fine line on that. But do we ever decide where we're going to harvest the oak? Do we ever decide, are we gonna take the pine timber off of this? Or how do you go about, I guess the question is, how do you go about doing that? Because we're selectively cutting. Otherwise, we couldn't get to the number of 4 feet that we have. And what would that mix be? I know it depends on what tract you're gonna cut, on how much pine or how much oak. And I know that within that, there was a lot of moving questions probably, but if you could expand on that a little bit.
Okay, a couple comments on that, Commissioner Goodell. I'll answer it a little bit backwards in that I don't think probably we have rejected a timber sale bid or decided not to move forward in anticipating of escalating markets. While we monitor them, that's pretty unpredictable. However, we have before rejected bids because we didn't feel like the value that we were getting was appropriate. And said, you know what, the pain will stay on the trees another year, let's wait and see if things improve. We have done that, and, you know, it's a call sometimes, but that's a little bit backwards approach to what you described, but, you know, there are times when we decide to do that. And as far as, I think what you were asking is generally when we're harvesting in areas, you know, there's gonna be multiple species. And of course, white oak trees, for example, are gonna be much more valuable than usually pine, or even some of the red oak or some of the lower grade species. We would normally not just come in and cut one species because the market's better right then and then come in again later and cut another one. And probably the reason for that is because, a couple reasons. We wanna get the habitat work done and wrap up a site so we can move on. But the other thing is probably you're not gonna get as good a value for the remaining if somebody has to move their equipment in twice or multiple times to come back to the same site. Whereas if you do it all at once, that's taken into consideration. Does that help?
Sure.
So it's a good thought, but in practicality, I'm not sure we would probably end up receiving less stumpage value because of multiple entries into the stand.
Okay, last question I would have is on these two that we're looking at today.
Uh-huh.
Do we have any kind of estimate as to what kind of revenue that you're looking to?
Yes.
On this, I've passed that up.
Yes, we do. On the first one I'm gonna be presenting, there is information on a range of price that we think it will bring. We have $100,000 to $150,000. I did a little math on that. That would be probably around $170,000 to $200,000 per million board feet. So, or 1,000 board feet. So, you know, we go with the range, but I would say on this sales ends up being about $170,000 per thousand. The other one is a little lower. The other timber sales in Foshee Creek Conservation Area, and if you've ever been to southern Ripley County, the timber, the quality is much lower than what you find on this other tract. So the estimate on that's just a little bit lower than that. I think I did the math on that, figures that an average price that we were looking at was around $155,000 or $155 per thousand board feet. So, yes, we look at that and it's in here. And as you know, we have timber sales ongoing all the time, and the ones that the ones that do come to the commission are ones that we think have a potential of reaching these higher values of over 100,000. Smaller sales are ongoing too.
Thank
If you entertain the motion, I'd make a motion to approve both sales.
I would entertain the motion. Any questions or comments?
I would just make one quick comment, and thank you, Lisa, for that earlier explanation that you went that's a beauty of this agency, is that we take these things into consideration. We don't just really make a decision willy-nilly. We take in public input, we talk to the private folks that are in the business, the timing, and then also the species that could be affected by it. So, I just wanted to make that comment because it's very much appreciated, and I think sometimes people miss that. So, thank you.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries, you have your sale. I would make one parting comment if I could, Lisa, and while I appreciate the economics, and I think the discussion was had so that citizens and people would know that we are responsible stewards and trying to be smart. But I also don't recall that really being part of the design for conservation. It was about, wildlife and resource management and serving the citizens. So, the market timing or the commodity business we're not in, I hope it'll always be, the top priority will be meeting the resource science and habitat goals and needs.
Always has been, like I said, forest health and diverse habitat is our objectives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Andrew.
Morning, Commissioner. Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Director Pauly, Ms. Maples, Deputy Directors. I'll be discussing the financial summary for May of 2017 that you have in your advanced materials. Just want you to note that right after that set of materials is another version of that same report. I am intending to use that format for the next fiscal year and ongoing. I wanted to give you a chance to look at it, see if it meets your needs, compare and contrast, so you've got 1 month. And if you have any issues or concerns, please let me know on the format. Having said that, we'll get into the receipts page, which is page 4 of the old document, or the current format document. On that page, you'll note that conservation sales tax receipts are 1.2% higher than last year at this time, and very consistent with our expected budget in May. And just a side note, according to OA, sales and use tax increased 1.8% in May. That was their number as well. And even today, I get a daily report because I'm looking at expenditures and revenues on a daily basis. And sales and use tax for the state is up 2.3%. So it is starting to rebound. Permit sales are 4.7% lower than last year currently, and 1.5% lower than expected. I don't think we've ever recovered from the end of April or rebounded from that loss of sales, and that's what's accounting for a lot of that. So the wet weather in the last 2 weekends of April, when we expect sales to happen. Federal reimbursements are 0.9% lower than last year and 7.8% below expectations for May. This trend has rebounded. We've actually, as of June 20th, we're within 1% of expectations. So we've gotten a lot of the federal revenues in the last couple of weeks. Sales and rentals are 2.1% lower than last year and 1.2% lower than anticipated. The other line is 85% higher than last year and 40% higher than expected, mainly due to the large donations received and a great deal of SEMA reimbursement. So in total receipts for May are 0.7% higher than last year and within 0.8% of expectations at this point. We move on to the disbursements page, which is page 6 of your packet. disbursements again are categorized into 4 major areas: personal service, expense, equipment, and capitals. Total personal service disbursements, first bold line, shows a 2.5% increase from the previous year and 0.7% less than expectations. The next bold line is total expenses, or total expense, which shows year-to-date disbursements are 1.4% higher than last year and 0.8% lower than anticipated at this point in the fiscal year. Equipment disbursements are shown on the third bold line and are 12.3% lower than last year and 15.9% higher than originally budgeted so far this fiscal year. That brings total operating expenditures at 1.2% higher than the previous year and really right at expectations for the year. Total capital disbursements, represented as the second to the last bold line, are 71.5% higher than last year and 14.9% than originally budgeted at this point in the fiscal year. So total disbursements at the bottom of the page through May are 7% higher than last year and 1.7% higher than expectations at this time. And this concludes my remarks on the financial summary. Just want to note as well that the financial RFP, the financial reporting system that I think it's been discussed for years, or I think it's been years, is in its final stages of a review at OA and is scheduled to go out as early as next week. So,
Any questions or comments for Commissioner Markey? Commissioner Bedell?
No.
Commissioner Bradford?
No, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, appreciate it.
Great work.
Once we format.
Thank you. Jacob, happy birthday. You're up.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I have the next 4 agenda items. They are all action items for the Commission.
Can we take these, do we have a motion to take these as a group, or do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
I think the record should show that we beat these things to death, including you previously. So I would have no comment to make on them, which I know you find to be very at the same time.
I was ready, sir.
Happy birthday. Yeah, happy birthday.
Leaving you alone,
Any other comments or questions?
but don't get used to it.
All right, all those in favor of these 4 action items as a group, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none? Thank you very much, Jacob.
Thank you very much.
Next up is Tom.
It's not my birthday.
Get comfortable.
Yes, sir. It's not my birthday, I'll tell you. Good morning, Commissioners. It's my pleasure to present the next item, which is an action item. We are recommending Commission approval of procedural changes to the Department leave paid and unpaid time off policy. As the Commission is aware, in March of 2017, Governor Eric Greitens signed Executive Order number 1709, instituting a paid parental leave policy for employees working in most executive branch agencies. Now, his executive order did exclude employees of independent commissions and other elected officials who set the policies for their offices, which is, of course, the Conservation Commission. But the governor encouraged agencies with independent commissions to adopt comparable policies for their employees. The recommendation is for the commission to approve a new form of leave, paid parental leave, which would provide primary caregivers up to 6 weeks of paid leave and secondary caregivers up to 3 weeks of paid leave. be a separate leave balance from our sick leave and annual leave balances that occur today. We're estimating the approximate financial impact of this to be about $200,000 per year based upon an average of about 45 births, which occur with department employees over each of the past 6 years. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have, but you do have the information in your packets.
Any questions or comments from any of the commissioners?
Just to get into the discussion point, I'll make the motion, we approve the recommendation.
Any seconds?
I was gonna make
You want to make a motion?
I was gonna make a motion.
Okay. You can make
Well,
a
we'll
motion.
table that, motion, and we'll open for any other motions on this action item.
I would, and we've had a lot of discussion about this. We have a study that we commissioned that we're supposed to get the results on, I think, in August.
Yes, sir.
And because of that, and it includes all of the benefits.
It will.
That we currently look to, I would make a recommendation and make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we table action on this until we get that study in August, at which time we're able to look at the total, which would include this. So I would make a motion that we table it until we get the study back.
So the motion, to be clear, let me clarify, the motion is we're gonna table this action item until completion of the job compensation study, and look at all benefits, as a entire package.
That is correct.
Okay, so I have a motion to that extent, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, we will look at this with the entire compensation package.
Right, thank you.
That moves us to the Realty Committee for item 14. Jennifer?
Morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Director Polly, Ms. Maples. I am pleased this morning to have the opportunity to bring back before you another draft of our land conservation strategy. And fortunate enough to have the opportunity to go through the National Conservation Leadership Institute at one point in my career. And one of the takeaway points there was to start with the why. And so I think it is very important with this land conservation strategy this morning to start with why this is an important document for us to consider today. Director Polly's talked a couple of times about a report that was released late in 2016 by Dr. Stephen Keller from Yale University and DJ Case and Associates, who's kind of our premier conservation and human dimensions study group in the country. And this study was about understanding and connecting Americans and nature. And while we learned from this study that Americans have a very strong interest and they have strong values in nature, there's a significant gap between their interest and their concern and their ability to connect with nature. And I think all of us in this room would say yes, that's definitely the case. And our interest, I guess, in putting the land conservation strategy together was twofold. One, it was to ensure that we would take the best approach to sustaining fish, forest, and wildlife into the future. And two, to make sure that we were being responsible in our consideration of connecting citizens with fish, forest, and wildlife, or nature in this state, however they may perceive nature. So through a great deal of discussion and deliberation since spring of this year with the commission, we have considered this land conservation strategy. At the last commission meeting, you all worked gracious enough to approve the strategy, but asked that we consider reprioritizing the strategies that were presented in a way that might better indicate the commission's current interest and the department's current interest in focusing on the citizen aspect of support and value of conservation in the state. And so the draft you have before you today does just that. It prioritizes the strategies that were presented, and I have highlighted the prioritization of the strategies on page 2 of the document. We took reordered the goals in the strategy to make the increasing citizen access to the outdoors near where they live the #1 goal of the strategy, and not to discount our role or the value of focusing on fish, forest, and wildlife, but to the point of making fish, forest, and wildlife management and nature more relevant to all of our citizens, and therefore sustaining our efforts probably in the future to be able to do our core mission, still focusing on maximizing fish, forest, and wildlife habitat conservation in goal number 2. So I present these changes in the document for your consideration and approval today.
Thank you, Jennifer. We, like the, design and development and Jacob's work was extensively reviewed. We've spent a lot of time on this in strategic planning, in executive session, and an open meeting last month. And we've all reviewed this information. I think we have a motion as it relates to this. It's not particularly an action item, but we want to document where we are.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would like to make a motion to adopt the conservation strategy, excuse me, as it's critical to our planning, so.
Very good.
Do we have a second to that?
Happy to second.
So we have a motion, a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very
And I just want to commend the staff and thank the commission. This is something that's near and dear to me. And it's a working document. I think that this is an important tool, and I think that's the purpose of having this vote is to give that staff that guides that you know, when they come to work, what are the rocks we're trying to move so that we can move mountains. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your support.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, if I could,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to back up to the previous item. And that has to do with the motion that was made to table until August. We've had a lot of discussion about that item. And the motion is not intended, obviously, to say that we're opposed to it, but we think it's untimely, I feel it's untimely. The fact that we've got this extensive study going is very costly, that looks at all of the benefit package. That we take it in step, we take that in total, and we recognize what this cost is because it will impact our budget at some point, but we look at it in total. And I appreciate being able to make that comment.
Thank you.
I would like to second Commissioner Goodell's comments. It's not that we would be against the idea, it's the process. And since we are spending a great deal of money on a job study that is considering benefits, that should be taken into consideration. So, and we are to get that report in August, so
Stay tuned.
stay tuned.
Thank you for those comments.
Thank
Aaron?
Good afternoon, or good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. If I could real quick, I don't have a legislative update today. I did have the opportunity on Wednesday to take 6 legislators on a field trip across the entire Ozarks. We traveled about 425 miles, starting in Willow Springs and eventually ending up on Hercules Glade to trap a female black bear, which was the first female in this area, which represents a new population. But I really want to say thank you to the staff that were there. Laura Conley, our fair bear biologist, Josh Wisdom, our wildlife damage biologist, Ashley Shank, our urban wildlife conservationist in the area, and Suzanne Johnson, the fur bear assistant. All young biologists, but let me tell you, commissioners, they're impressive. The way they handled themselves, the way they took care of that bear, the way they answered every question from a representative down to their grandkids was totally professional, and you'd be totally proud in the way they conducted themselves. So I just want to pass on that thanks. You can send them a thank you card, but I want their supervisors to hear how well they performed in the field on Wednesday. So with that, I'll start with our 80th anniversary update. To an organization,
We have a 3-second delay.
yeah, we are live streaming, aren't we? there.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that. An organization like the department, communication and outreach are critical for our success. Going back to the first 50 years, this is especially true of any agency created by initiative because citizens take a personal interest in what they've created. And we see that today through our hunter education classes. Our conservation agents are still giving hunter education classes, and our commission is still meeting and gathering input from citizens in these meetings here today. Even look at our Conservationist magazine. The first cover of the magazine in 1937 and the brand new cover that we'll see in July. The Conservationist still sells and tells the department's story about conservation here in Missouri. Look at our conservation agents. They give radio shows every year. Whether it was a radio show in the 1930s or a conservation agent radio show in 2015, they're still telling the message. And then the thousands of one-on-one contacts that we make with landowners each year. Here in this picture, and this is of personal interest to me, this is my grandfather, Paul Jeffries, probably in the 1950s, working with a landowner up in northeast Missouri. And then in the other picture, a very green area biologist in 2001, Aaron Jeffries, working with a landowner in Cole County to develop a quail habitat project. Those one-on-one contacts probably equal over 1 million contacts each year. As we come together here over the next couple of months, we're going to celebrate the department's 80th anniversary. We'll be hosting a variety of open houses around the state, starting this summer and well into the fall, to celebrate what makes Missouri great, or Missouri conservation great, and that's the citizens who care about conservation. Director Pauly is going to attend each event, give a presentation, and ask citizens for input on some of the big challenges that we see over in the future. We're going to cover a variety of topics at these 80th anniversary events, including regulation review as part of Governor Greitens' executive order, our new strategic plan, infrastructure needs and what citizens expect on our conservation areas, as well as various regulation proposals and other regional hot topics that we may see. Our open house forums will begin in Cape Girardeau on August 8th and run all the way through October, ending in Kansas City on October 26th. In addition, we're going to have a variety of other booths at county fairs, the state fair, and a couple non-traditional venues that would be new for the department. In Kansas City, we're going to attend the Kansas City Health and Safety Fair at Arrowhead Stadium. This is an event that's put on for African Americans to stress the importance of health. So this will be a completely new venue for us with several thousand individuals attending that. Also here in St. Louis, we're going to be attending the Festival of Nations at Tower Grove Park, which is a multicultural community event that will attract thousands of visitors. In addition, in September, on September 21st, we will be co-hosting 100 years of conservation success with our own Heritage Foundation, the Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation, to celebrate its 20th anniversary. So our 80-year anniversary, the Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation's 20th year anniversary. Again, this will be held on September 21st at the new Wonders of Wildlife Museum, and so I hope commissioners will be able to attend with this pretty rough group of individuals we see in the picture here, especially the two in the middle there. As with any effort, communication is key. Our staff have done a tremendous job coming together about every 2 weeks to really keep this breathing, living document, our communication plan, up to date. We're going to highlight the open house forums and other events that we have going on in the Missouri Conservationists. We're going to send invitations to all our various partners and friends around the state. You look at the list of partners that we have, from NGOs to CAP agreements to TRIM agreements. We have thousands of partners out there. We're going to be sending each of them a letter from the department. The department's webpage is going to highlight the 80th anniversary events. Director Pauly has already shot a short video encouraging people to attend these open house forums. We'll definitely use social media, radio PSAs, our conservation radio shows, and a variety of other media outlets to get our message across. So commissioners, I definitely think 80 years is worth something we should celebrate. This is exciting times in conservation as we work through our strategic plan. I hope to see each and every one of you at one of these open house forums, if not a couple. But with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments? Commissioner Vidal? Commissioner Murphy? Bradford? Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate the presentation and look forward to those celebrations.
Thank you.
Other matters of interest, Director Pauly?
Thank you, Mr.
Well, I have one matter I'd like to just say, and I just want to thank Commissioner Murphy for his graciousness in the last meeting, letting me take the gavel, which is really his last meeting as chair before election of new officers. And I think it's typical of Dave to be that gracious person. He's that guy, and I thank you for that. And it's been an honor for me to serve with you and to serve with what is arguably the absolute, well, I shouldn't say absolute, but this is clearly one of the strongest commissions and most engaged. I know that isn't easy on staff all the time, but I'm very proud to have served and especially appreciate, thank you, Dave, and thank you for your service. I think that there's a plaque that's being delayed in the wood shop, typical of your token.
Often have been in the woodshed.
So I imagine that'll be at the next meeting. We don't have any additional consent agenda items because there's nothing taken off of the consent agenda, correct? So we wouldn't need anything there. We already approved the consent agenda. And so unless Director Pauly has any other comments, we'll move to, or if there's any other matters of interest, we'll move to election of officers.
We do have a few, if you would, just a few moments. And first of all, Jennifer Vanson Moore mentioned, and I had forgotten to mention in my open remarks, that we do have one of our own who was just included in the next class for the NCLI, National Conservation Leadership Institute, and that's her own Joni Straub. So she will be attending the next NCLI class. Just a huge thank you, of course, to you as we had the opportunity to do last night, Commissioner Blair. So incredibly grateful for your 6 years of service, and we know that you will not be a stranger. So just on behalf of the staff, another huge thank you for your work. And assuming that the outcome of the elections would have Commissioner Murphy not serving as chair, we absolutely will recognize him at the next round. But if you would just give us a few moments, we do have a special guest with us who would like to make a remark, and that is Ron Coleman, who serves as president of the Conservation Federation of Missouri, who would like to take the podium just for a moment or two. Ron?
Welcome, Ron.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll get up here and do my duty. But members of the commission, Chairman Blair and Director Sarah, it's always a privilege to be here in the ranks of so many dedicated and committed, qualified professionals who have become friends over the years. But on behalf of the Conservation Federation of Missouri, I'm here actually to thank Commissioner Blair for his 6 years of committed service to helping us preserve and protect our conservation heritage here in the state of Missouri. In our over 80-year relationship with the Commission and the department, the Federation has come to understand how important it really is to have committed, dedicated, qualified commissioners serving in the role that each of you here today fulfill, and particularly to thank Commissioner Blair for his service on behalf of the Conservation Federation of Missouri, are over 5,000 members, are over nearly 90 affiliate organizations in our state. And so thank you, Commissioner Blair, for all of your good work, and thanks to each of the commissioners for fulfilling your obligations. We know how taxing it is on your time and energy and resources, so appreciate you giving me a few minutes to represent the Federation today. Good luck to you.
Thank you, Ron, and we, in like kind, greatly appreciate our relationship with the Federation, and I think in many situations, people in the state don't realize how important and what an important role the Federation played, and that there would be no Missouri Department of Conservation, there would be no constitutional authority, there wouldn't be what we have today had it not been for the leaders and for that organization who's had our back for those 80 years. So thank you for what you all do.
It's wonderful to hear you say that. I've only been there in 40 of the 80. I've only seen half of it, but thank you for recognizing that.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it.
Everybody needs to see that, and then I want to thank everybody for last night. There's so much been made about my 6 years. My 6 years have been nothing special, or I haven't done anything different than any other commissioner. Everything we've done is on the backs of the people here and the amazing staff. And we're just, I guess we're just the lens of the camera, or we're the ones that are out front, or the focal point of all the hard work. But it really is a tribute to all of you, and it's an honor to serve. So thank you, and let's get on with the election of officers.
Greatly appreciate it.
Put a love.
Thank you, Ron.
Do I have a motion? Next item of agenda is election of officers. Nominations are now in order for the office of chairperson. Do I have any nominations?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to nominate Commissioner Rivera for chairman of the commission.
There's no second for that. Chairman Bedell is nominated. Are there any further nominations for chairperson? If not, nominations are closed, and we'll vote on the chair.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we have a chairman. New chairperson will now take the remainder of the election process and the meeting.
No, I would like for you to continue.
I gotta keep doing this. All right, so the next item on the agenda is the election of vice chair. So do we have a nomination for vice chair?
I nominate Meredith Brett.
Okay, are there any other nominations for the vice chair person? None being, we'll have a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have a vice chairman. Do we need to elect the other officers as well?
Secretary,
Do we have a nomination for secretary?
yes.
Yes.
How about Mr. Murphy?
Do we have any other nominations? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We have a secretary. All right, that concludes our meeting. Again, thank you all for the opportunity and privilege to serve, and the meeting's adjourned.
Good job.